Welcome back to the Demon Slayer Comparison Series. Today we'll cover the final episode of the District Arc, which covers the entirety of chapters 95, 96, and 97. This is the last episode, so in commemoration we'll have some special numbers at the end. But before that, let's get right into the comparison. The episode begins with the best part from episode 10, as the crew is cutting off the demon siblings' heads. This isn't a full recap though, because after Daki and Gyutaro look at each other, we get an anime-only depiction of Uzui moving away to catch his breath while leaving his sword in Gyutaro. Whereas in the manga, he starts noticing something is wrong with Gyutaro's body right after it hits the ground. As you may have noticed, these panels are actually from chapter 94, and since I added them in last episode in the numbers, we'll leave them out of the numbers in this episode. I'm glad Ufotable decided to put this in because it gives us more context for why Uzui was so desperate to warn Tanjiro about the erupting corpse. And when it does erupt, the episode doesn't end on a cliffhanger this time, because after the explosion we get the anime-only depiction of Nezuko's box flying up into the air before she gets out and grows up to use her blood demon art in order to negate Gyutaro's suicide attack. Tanjiro did explain later that Nezuko protected everyone from the attack, but it's nice that we now get to see this in real time. It's after that we reach the Kimetsu no Yaiba logo. There's no opening song this episode, so right after this and the title card, we jump right into another short anime exclusive bit of Nezuko trying to wake her brother up. It's when Tanjiro finally does wake up that we enter the first panel of chapter 95 with Nezuko looking down at her brother. Besides some additional shots of destruction, there really isn't too much to mention here, although Tanjiro does seem to be less surprised at the current state of the district. I find it interesting how Ufotable will ever so slightly change the character expressions to fit the mood of the scene, but will also draw all the goofy faces with utmost precision. These faces can be considered comical, like the black dot eyes that seem to come and go from Tanjiro, but they can also be considered a staple of Gotoge's art regardless of the situation. It's a hard thing to balance, but I think Ufotable did a good job here. They also did a good job at adding Tanjiro's broken fingers back into the scene here. You can probably already tell by this point, but with all the superficial changes, this episode will be pretty by the books. Besides the obvious framing differences, most shots are ripped right out of the manga, with the exception of those revised facial features and redundancy fixes. This episode doesn't nearly have the movement from the last few episodes, nor does the narration jump around a lot like it did in the beginning episodes. Likewise, everything up to when Tanjiro checks up on Zenitsu is pretty much the same, although Tanjiro does get one additional line asking Zenitsu where Inosuke is. Once they do find Inosuke, this is also pretty accurate, despite some different angles here and there. It is worth noting that we do see Nezuko's left hand in this shot now instead of her right, likely because this is the hand that she'll be putting on Inosuke in just a second to heal him. Now that Inosuke is poison-free and demands food, we get some additional cries from Tanjiro, as well as some disgruntled ones from Inosuke, clearly unhappy that Tanjiro and Nezuko are clinging to him. And it's from here that we transition to Suma and her breakdown as the girls are distraught over the state of their husband. It's nice that Ufotable kept in the comical vibe that Suma was giving off here. It really helps reassure us that there would be no way Uzui was going to go out like this. Keeping us in suspense after what we went through with Rengoku would have just been far too cruel. I find it hilarious how the rocks that Makio is trying to shove down Suma's throat are also now flying past Uzui in his hilariously decrepit state. Once Medic Nezuko finally strolls in to save the day and lights Uzui's body on fire, we get some slight character repositioning of the shocked look on all the girls' faces, as well as a stronger depiction of Suma racing off into the distance with Nezuko. While the girls seem to be taking this pretty seriously, Uzui looks like he's just about done at this point. After seeing the shot of Uzui's reaction to being saved, as well as that amazingly recreated shot of Suma and the girls' reaction, we get another short anime exclusive scene showing all of the girls crying over Uzui one by one, as well as Uzui apologizing for making them worry. After some more crooked finger head pats from Tanjiro, as well as one additional arigato from Suma, this is where Tanjiro takes off to find the remains of the demonic duo. Though it is technically Nezuko that takes off here. And when he finally does find the pool of blood, likely from the bottom half of one of their bodies, Tanjiro approaches the blood a little differently. See, in the anime he throws a stone from behind cover to make sure that there are no more unwitting blood blades ready to pop out at him, but in the manga he instead readies his sword without really hiding behind anything. Maybe not the smartest play in the world, but I was too distracted by Nezuko to care. After Tanjiro collects the blood, we now get a closer shot of Tanjiro actually giving the cat the blood sample. Honestly, it's like Tanjiro forgot how seriously messed up his fingers are doing all these mundane tasks without a care in the world. I understand Ufotable's being as faithful as possible, even though his fingers aren't always shown properly or clearly in the manga, but God, these things are just so hard to look at sometimes. Moving along, now we're at the part where Tanjiro arrives to find Gyutaro and Daki arguing with each other. But before we get into the lines on this panel here, we actually get 2 additional ones from each demon respectively that will lead into these lines. The rest of these lines are mostly the same, but since their argument would still technically be going on in the background while Tanjiro has his internal monologue, the lines from the demons on the next panel are put in during this shot, as well as 2 additional bursts of anger before they start running out of breath. From here is when Daki starts going for the low blow, saying that Gyutaro couldn't possibly be related to her. And Tanjiro's reaction to this conjecture is actually what ends out chapter 95, and we move right along into chapter 96 with Daki pretty much saying the same thing again for extra hurt value. Once Daki finishes that rant, we get some anime-exclusive huffs from Gyutaro signifying how deep her words hit before throwing some even more hurtful words back her way. Even more so in the Viz Media version where he calls her a shrill harpy. I'm really glad this pause was put in because it reaffirms a little later just how proud Gyutaro was to have a sister like her and that these words almost attack his very existence in a way. After Tanjiro comes in to give some counseling advice, we have a few meaningful changes here. First off, the anime corrected a mistake in which the left side of Daki's face is completely gone in one panel but then rematerializes in the next page. And second, that Ufotable decided to move Nezuko around a bit for this part. Now, character repositioning is nothing new at this point, but this one's a little interesting. See, in the anime she remains by Tanjiro's side, but in the manga she decides to chill right next to Daki as she crumbles away. I kind of understand why Ufotable did this change, as Nezuko just staring at her with those dotted eyes might appear comical to some, but we do lose the representation of the sisters being on one side and the brothers being on the other, further symbolizing what Tanjiro mentioned earlier about how Tanjiro and Nezuko could have easily ended up like these two. Personally, I would have liked it if Nezuko was still next to Daki, but maybe in a slightly more serious way. Moving along, now we're in Gyutaro's flashback sequence. Ufotable dramatized this part accordingly by now starting it with either a tenant or landlord opening the door to show Gyutaro now sitting with his mother's corpse in the dark before we flash forward to her hitting him while she was still alive. Viz Media never mentions that this was his mother here, but I guess it can be surmised as much. Now, last episode I mentioned how Gyutaro's insults toward Tanjiro change depending on the version. But what's interesting is in this scene, the insults thrown toward him as a kid are basically the same relative to that version. By that I mean he threw the exact same insults at Tanjiro last episode. All those filthy remarks thrown at him further cements where Gyutaro got his disdain for others more fortunate than him, and somewhat explains why he gave Tanjiro a chance to turn into a demon after calling him filthy. Showing even more of Gyutaro's filthy side, we now actually watch him eat insects and mice he found on the street instead of just showing him play with a sickle like he does in the manga. Crunchyroll did mistakenly call it a scythe though. A mistake I'm guilty of in the past as well, but in all fairness they both sound very similar in Japanese. Now this is the part where Ume, aka pre-mortem Daki, enters the picture. Likewise, this is also the part where we finally learn some more about Gyutaro's profession. Like I said in episode 7, chapter 86 houses some information about this, although it never was elaborated until now. It seems like this was the moment when Gyutaro became Gyutaro, as it was the turning point in his life where his sister helped him lose his sense of inferiority. But unfortunately his life made another turn when he discovered Ume's body burnt to a crisp. It seems like Ufotable wanted to show us more of Gyutaro discovering his sister's body as he was bringing food back for her this time around. There are also a few more things to note here. First of which, there are some slight line changes to the script in which Gyutaro now clarifies it was when Ume turned 13 and stabbed the samurai that things went south. This was left open-ended in the manga with no actual name given, and that's probably what caused Viz Media to mistakenly say it was when Gyutaro turned 13. And second, we now see Gyutaro's reaction to discovering Ume before he triggers the flashback with her stabbing the samurai in the eye. Gyutaro took pride in collecting from those more fortunate than him, but having his sister taken from him like this after all the suffering he went through his whole life sent him over the edge, all the way until the one-eyed samurai slices him from behind. I'm so glad we can see these two more clearly now as we get the full satisfaction of Gyutaro playing the reverse Uno card, essentially yeeting the woman out of the frame here. These are the final moments that cemented Gyutaro as a person before he became a demon, and watching him cut both of them with upper thrusted body movements is oddly satisfying for such a sad backstory. As we watch Gyutaro walk down the street with his dying sister, this scene is accompanied with this bleak dark undertone. That is, until everything brightens up when we're introduced to Gyutaro's saving grace. We don't yet know the name of this man, but it looks like he just got back from his midnight snack before dropping one of his leftovers on the ground. He doesn't do this action in the manga though, likely because the hand that he was holding the corpse with was also the one that he extends to Gyutaro later. In accordance with this change, there's also some blood that's been added to his hand here. Up to where Gyutaro accepts the man's offer, this is where chapter 96 ends, and as you might have realized by this point, there are no commercial break cuts in this episode, so let's move right along into the final chapter of this arc, chapter 97. To transition us into the first line of the chapter, we get one additional line from Gyutaro saying that if he had one regret in his life, it would be Ume. This section really isn't animated that much, mostly showing still cuts of what Ume's life could have been like without the lessons Gyutaro taught her. All the lines housed within are pretty much dead accurate, although the framing and character placements can be a little different sometimes. Likewise, the scene of Gyutaro and Ume in limbo here is also pretty faithful, with the exception of some revised facial expressions, like how Ume doesn't nearly get as shocked at Gyutaro snapping at her not to follow him this time around. I love it how ever since Gyutaro realized Ume had a chance to not go to hell, they framed it in a way that shows both of them on two different sides of eventuality before showing almost the exact same cut with both of them on the dark side. Despite how different Ume's life could have been without Gyutaro, she refuses to leave her brother's side, even if it means following him into hell. It's beautiful in a sad, twisted way. It's from here that we move back into reality, with the Disney-style fairy dust leaving Tanjiro and Nezuko's hands before turning a bluish-green color. I like to think that this color now represents Gyutaro, and the purple that comes in a little later as a representation of Ume and how they were both able to be with each other in the end. Finally, Tanjiro and Nezuko can take a much-needed breather knowing that everything turned out well in the end. And from that sentimental moment, we dampen those feelings as Snake Man Iguro comes in and starts belittling Uzui and his efforts. While Uzui and Makio aren't really as upset as Viz Media portrayed it, I'm still on Suma's side here. Like, where the hell was this guy when we needed him the most? Either way, the paneling in this section is also spot on, although now we can still see Suma eyeballing Iguro while clinging to Uzui. Also, it looks like Suma and Hinatsuru now finished their little scuffle before reaching the panel where Uzui greenlights Tanjiro as an upcoming Hashira candidate. And as Iguro expresses his shock that Tanjiro is still alive, we'll now skip over the next two panels and replace them with some additional footage of Tanjiro riding around looking for Zenitsu and Inosuke again. We'll get back to these panels in just a bit, but for now we'll move right along into the next scene at the Ubuyashiki residence where the crows are informing everyone of the crew's success. This time Ubuyashiki looks noticeably happier in addition to how sickly he's gotten since we last saw him in the Mugen Train movie. More or less, there isn't too much to talk about here, just the little things, like how the woman we now know as Amane is next to him in this shot, or how the crows react slightly differently to certain actions. There's also some very minor line mix-arounds where the kids that enter say their father's name after Amane tells them to hurry instead of before. Also, now all three of the kids that enter the room now get the chance to say his name instead of just two. From here we move into the final manga page of the chapter, showing Akaza being summoned to the alternate dimension. The 3D render of this place will never cease to amaze me, nor how well they pan their characters around this warped space. But that'll have to be for another day. Now on the last panel, this is where Akaza says his final line about how an upper demon must have been defeated. And while this might be the last panel of the chapter, we're not quite done yet. Because after one anime exclusive twang from this biwa instrument, we move right into our last dose of anime exclusive content this arc as Uzui and his harem head out into retired life. Here we get some final words from all of them, pretty much just being thankful that they can all put this behind them now. I'm glad this part was put in, because in the manga we never really got a proper send-off from Uzui and the girls. We just kind of moved right along into the next arc, so getting to hear one final flashy line from Uzui is quite the treat. It's now that we start to finally finish out the chapter by rewinding to the two panels we skipped over earlier, with Tanjiro and his crew celebrating their success through the pain of their wounds. Ufotable chose well in making this the last panel to adapt. It closes out the series well and leaves us with newfound expectations for what's to come next. Until next season airs, this is farewell for now, fellas. It's been fun. And, well, now we're done. Not just with episode 11, but with chapter 97, volume 11, and the district arc as a whole. So, in commemoration of reaching the end, let's move into an extended version of Numbers Time. Episode 11 had an extended runtime of about 32 minutes with about 28 minutes of canonical content. During this time, there were a total of 287 unique cuts. These cuts adapted a total of 3 chapters with 54 pages and 235 panels. That leaves us with a more modest amount of 52 anime exclusive cuts this time. But we're not done there. Since this is the last episode and all, let's round up all the numbers from every episode and put them into one final count. Some of you might recall that I didn't count the numbers in episode 4, but for the occasion I went back and counted everything in that episode. And after rounding up all the numbers from every other previous Demon Slayer video, here's the verdict. The Demon Slayer District Arc had a runtime of roughly 5 hours with about 4 hours of canonical content. During that time, there were just about 3,346 unique cuts. These cuts adapted a total of 31 chapters with 574 pages and 2,188 panels. And finally, subtracting the unique cuts with the panel numbers gives us exactly 1,158 anime exclusive cuts. To both Gotoge and Ufotable, absolutely amazing work, everyone. Here's to the next season. So, that's the end of the video, but I do have a few words before I go. First and foremost, I love you guys. Ever since I put out that Mugen Train video, my channel has evolved at a rate I never thought possible. It's because of this new wave of support that I have a reason to start putting these little videos of mine front and center. I have the resources to do that now, and you guys are to thank. This channel has been through a lot in the past, and I'm so proud of what you've all helped to create here. Thank you to all my new viewers, and especially thank you to all my long-term viewers that stuck with me through thick and thin while I was trying to find my way on this platform. You guys are the foundations of this channel, and I am forever grateful. Now I'm making it sound like this is goodbye forever, but we've got more comparison videos on the way, so keep an eye out for them. And based on the results from the poll I put out, I think I know exactly what we're covering next. I hope you all look forward to where we go from here. Thanks again, everyone. You're all the best. Well, that's it for me. Once again, I hope you all have a fantastic day. This is Registry, signing off. Take care, everyone.